Hello everyone, welcome to week 2 of EDCI 595. This week we will continue our first learning module on the basics of differentiation. So I do want to recap just a couple of things from last week. You did a really good job on your discussion posts. I was happy to see that you really analyzed those cases specifically. And just to spark our memory here, let's talk about those foundations of differentiation again. So the first thing that we see in those 3 classrooms is that all of the teachers are attempting to consider how the students are unique. So there are 3 different ways that we differentiate for students. So there are 3 different things that we can consider about students. Do the awkward thing where you actually pause right now and see if you can list them all. There's my awkward pause. Okay, so your first is by your students' readiness. And we talked last week, readiness is not how intelligent they are, right? Readiness is simply how ready are they to learn this specific material, okay? We can also differentiate by their interest, what makes them interested. That can be their academic interest. It could also be their extracurricular interest. And then lastly, we differentiate for their preferences, right? Preferences or learning preferences, okay? So remember, these are all about the student. So what is the student's readiness? What is my student's interest? And what are their learning preferences? Now, we, as the educators, we can change the end product, we can change the process, and we can also change the content. So the content of what they're learning. So again, here we've got the students, and then this is the teacher's job. So how am I changing the end product? How am I changing the process? And how am I changing the content itself? So we're kind of shifting gears this week. Last week in your discussion board posts, I asked you for evidence of those 6 components. So how are the teachers addressing readiness, interest, and learning preference? And then how are they changing product, process, and content? So that was pretty much a positive evaluation. What I want you to do now is select one classroom. So hear me clearly, you do not need to analyze all of the classrooms, but I do want you to select one classroom to focus on. And now I want you to consider what are some ways that this teacher could improve their efforts to differentiate. So this is going to require some thought, right? I will tell you all 3 of these teachers in some way are differentiating. So they are succeeding. In fact, I like to always point out that just a little bit of differentiation is great. So it's not as if this class says we have to highly differentiate in every single lesson that we teach. But I do want you to think a little bit more analytically this week and consider what could be done to improve this lesson plan. So what are some potential shortcomings? Okay, and a couple of things that I want to kind of give you in terms of a hint, right? So first, just notice I have old teaching materials in the back of this piece of paper. Again, readiness, interest, preference. Those are your students. One key thing in terms of differentiation is how do we know student readiness, interest, and preference? That's one really important issue to consider as you are analyzing these examples in terms of what could potentially be improved. Another thing to consider in the world of your product, process, and content, I want you to think about last week's discussion about our train tracks. Remember, we talked about tracking in education has a pretty negative connotation. It means if you start on above grade level track, there's no moving back and forth. And not only is that wrong in terms of meeting students as their needs developed and as they further need to be challenged, but it also has a really negative connotation. So remember, we talked about, and I drew this last week, your 3 train tracks. Once you start on track A, you can't go any further to get to track B or C. I want you to really think about, in these 3 examples, are students able to go from track A to B, right? Or do they start on one track and they kind of have to stay there? In my opinion, the best way to really do these analyses is to imagine that you are a student in the classroom. So for example, let's take, I believe it was scenario 2, the band classroom. So within the band classroom, we have varying levels of readiness because some students have a background in playing the recorder and others don't. Okay, so the scenario as it's described is there are varying kind of levels of difficulty in terms of components of the piece that the class is working on. Okay, so let's just imagine we have 3 groups. We have novice, moderate, and experienced. Now, I literally want you to visualize yourself in the classroom. You are a student who is advanced, or that's what I said, advanced. So I'm sitting in the classroom. What am I doing if I'm in the advanced group? Okay, well, I'm looking at the music. At the beginning of class, I know that the band director is starting with the novice students. So what am I doing as I'm waiting? Am I maybe trying to learn the music on my own? Does the case study mention what I should be doing? What's really going on in that? What is my process of learning? Okay. Then when it's finally time for the band director to help me, what is he doing in that case to help me? How am I learning the new material? I'm getting at process here, right? Then you can think about, well, what's your final product? Okay, well, now I've got the final product of this portion of the piece. And a really important part here, guys, is how will my teacher know if I understood? How will my teacher know that I could produce that final product? Do I perform it for him? Do I perform as part of an ensemble and there's a lot of other things going on? So does my teacher have the ability to adjust based off of how I'm doing? Okay, so these are things that I want you to really think about. Same scenario in case 1, right? So we've got, in that case, we have 2 different groups. We have the grade level groups and we've got the above grade level group. So I'm in the grade level group and I'm walking around taking pictures of these different simple machines. What's my thought process, right? How am I learning the material versus the individual in the advanced group who's finding a problem and then trying to solve it, okay? Ask yourself as the student, based on this lesson, could it be different based on my needs? So could it be different based on my interests? What if I prefer to learn differently? Is there a different way for me to do this? Right? So really put yourself in the scenario of being a child in that classroom, and that will help you as you analyze these. So this is your first application assignment. And all of your application assignments, unless otherwise noted in your syllabus, are always due Sunday evenings. Okay? So you do have the entire week to work on this. And that means I'm looking for a lot of quality analysis, and I'm particularly looking for you to provide evidence of where you got your ideas. Okay? So make sure that you are reviewing the associated rubric for this assignment. And just to clarify, I will be looking for your final submission by Sunday evening. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know.